The massive doors to the Grand Convocation Hall slid open with a whisper, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with beings from across the galaxy. Captain Mira Alvarez took a steadying breath as she stepped inside, her polished boots clicking softly against the translucent floor. Above her, streams of light refracted through crystalline domes, bathing the hall in hues of gold and blue. Alien diplomats lined the circular tiers, their varied forms, from iridescent scales to writhing tendrils, glistening under the luminescence. For centuries, humanity had been a subject of intrigue and caution for the Galactic Union. A species that had clawed its way out of its own conflicts to achieve interstellar travel in just a few centuries was rare. Dangerous. And now, humanity stood on the precipice of inclusion, or rejection, into the Union. Mira, clad in a formal yet practical Earth Alliance uniform, walked with purpose toward the central dais. Despite her composed exterior, her thoughts churned. She was Earth's military liaison, chosen for her tactical mind and sharp diplomacy. Her mission was clear: to prove humanity belonged among the stars. From the shadows, Overseer Thraxian watched her arrival. His insectoid mandibles clicked faintly in what could only be described as amusement. The Grackle Overseer, a towering figure with a segmented, chitinous body, was infamous for his disdain of lesser species. Humanity, to him, was a primitive anomaly, a fluke of evolution that had no place in the refined politics of the Union. As Mira reached the center, a counselor addressed the assembly. "We convene today to deliberate the induction of Earth, a young, predatory species, into the Galactic Union." Mira felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes. She stood tall, her dark eyes scanning the room. "Predatory, yes," she began, her voice steady. "But also innovative, adaptable, and capable of building alliances. Traits that make us not just survivors, but contributors." Thraxian rose from his place, his multifaceted eyes gleaming. Adaptability," he said, his voice a raspy hum. "Is that what you call your endless wars and violent history?" A murmur rippled through the chamber. Mira didn't flinch. "Our history is one of challenges overcome," she countered. "Every conflict taught us resilience. Every hardship forced us to innovate. We've learned, and we've grown." Thraxian's mandibles twitched. "Words are wind, Captain Alvarez. The Union requires actions. Proof." Before Mira could respond, Thraxian raised one clawed hand. "I invoke the right of evaluation," he declared, his voice carrying an edge of triumph. Gasps echoed in the chamber. Mira's pulse quickened. The right of evaluation was an archaic tradition, seldom used, where a species' worth was tested through combat. It was less about strength and more about adaptability and strategy. The challenge was brutal, often lethal, and designed to favor experienced warriors. The counselor hesitated. "Overseer Thraxian, this is highly irregular." "Yet within our laws," Thraxian interrupted smoothly. "If humans are as capable as they claim, let them prove it." The council murmured, deliberating. Mira clenched her fists. She could see where this was heading. This wasn't just about humanity's strength, it was a trap. Finally, the counselor nodded. "The right of evaluation is granted. Earth must select a representative." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mira stepped forward, ready to volunteer, but the counselor added, "By law, the representative must be chosen at random from among the humans present." Mira's heart sank. She glanced around the small Earth delegation, consisting mostly of diplomats and civilians who had won lotteries for the honor of witnessing this historic moment. Her gaze landed on Joe Carter, a broad-shouldered Texan tourist wearing a BOLO tie and cowboy boots. He was leaning casually against the railing, chewing on what appeared to be beef jerky. The holographic selection process began, light flickering across the faces of the delegation. Mira's stomach tightened as it slowed, then stopped, on Joe. Joe blinked, the jerky momentarily forgotten in his hand. What now?" "You've been selected," the counselor said. Joe straightened, adjusting his hat. "Well, shoot. Guess I'm representing Earth." Mira groaned inwardly as Thraxian's mandibles clicked in delight. Minutes later, Mira cornered Joe in a side chamber, her frustration barely contained. "Do you have any idea what you've been thrown into?" Joe shrugged, his drawl unbothered. "Not a clue. But I reckon it can't be worse than wrangling bulls on my daddy's ranch." "This isn't a rodeo," Mira snapped. "It's a life-or-death combat trial designed to test the absolute limits of a species' capabilities. You're going to be up against creatures engineered to kill." Joe scratched his chin. "Huh. Sounds like a bad day on the ranch, but with fancier critters." Mira stared at him, her disbelief giving way to a grudging respect. His calm demeanor, while infuriating, had an undeniable steadiness. She took a deep breath. "Fine. If we're doing this, you're training with me. I'm not letting humanity's fate rest on luck and cowboy charm." Joe tipped his hat. "Ma'am, I appreciate the vote of confidence." Later, as the preparations began, Mira briefed Joe on what to expect. "The arena will test your instincts, resourcefulness, and endurance. It's not just brute strength, it's strategy. If you survive long enough, you'll win." Joe nodded. "Sounds like you're saying I've got to outthink whatever they throw at me." "Exactly." Mira hesitated. "But there's something else. Thraxian's playing a deeper game. I don't trust this to be fair." Joe's grin widened. "Fair ain't something we Texans count on, Captain. We just get the job done." For the first time, Mira allowed herself a small smile. "Let's hope you can back that up." The Grand Convocation Hall reconvened as the council announced the trial would begin the following day. Thraxian's gaze locked with Mira's across the chamber, his expression smug. As the crowd dispersed, Joe leaned over to Mira and muttered, "You know, this Thraxian fella might think he's smart, but I reckon he's never dealt with a Carter." Mira sighed, shaking her head. "Let's just hope you're half as good as you think you are." Joe chuckled, adjusting his hat. "Guess we'll find out tomorrow." Cliffhanger. As Mira and Joe left the hall, a shadowy figure approached Thraxian. "The modifications to the trial have been made," the figure whispered. Thraxian's mandibles twitched in satisfaction. "Good. Let's see if these humans can truly adapt, or if their bravado is their downfall." Joe Carter stood in the middle of a sleek, metallic room filled with strange, glowing panels and racks of alien weapons. The room pulsed with an eerie blue light, casting long shadows on the walls. Mira Alvarez circled him like a drill sergeant, her sharp eyes scanning his posture. "All right, cowboy," she said, tossing him a cylindrical device. "This is your basic plasma blade. It's not a sword, so don't swing it around like you're in some hollow movie. The edge can cut through most materials, but it requires precision." Joe caught the device effortlessly, his calloused hands turning it over as if it were a tool from his ranch. "Huh," he said, pressing a button. A glowing, humming blade extended from the hilt. He gave it an experimental swing. "Feels like a high-tech machete. Reckon I could clear brush with this." Mira pinched the bridge of her nose. "This isn't about brush. The creatures in the arena won't give you time for trial and error. You need to be sharp, literally and figuratively. Now try attacking that target." She pointed to a holographic construct of a predator with serrated claws and glowing eyes. It snarled menacingly, its translucent form flickering. Joe stepped forward, sizing up the target. "Looks mean," he said before swinging the plasma blade. The strike went wide, the hum of the blade slicing through the air. The holographic predator lunged, claws extended, its movements startlingly real. Joe stumbled back, nearly dropping the weapon. "Whoa! It fights back?" "Of course it does," Mira snapped. "This isn't some carnival game. Focus!" Joe steadied himself, his eyes narrowing. This time, he shifted his stance, his movements slower and more deliberate. When the predator lunged again, he sidestepped and brought the blade down in a clean arc, dispersing the hologram with a crackle of light. Mira nodded approvingly. "Better. You're not completely hopeless." Joe wiped imaginary sweat from his brow. "High praise, Captain. What's next?" The training continued, each exercise more grueling than the last. Mira introduced him to alien projectile weapons, environmental hazards, and even rudimentary first aid using alien tech. Joe's initial clumsiness gave way to a surprising adaptability. "All right," Mira said, gesturing toward a shimmering platform. "This will simulate terrain you might encounter in the arena. Step on it." Joe complied, and the room shifted. The sterile walls melted away, replaced by dense jungle. The air grew humid, and the sound of alien birds filled the space. Joe whistled. "Y'all really went all out with the tech here." Myra's voice came from a hidden speaker. "This isn't for sightseeing. Move forward." Joe trudged through the foliage, his boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from the bushes. He froze, scanning the area. Out of nowhere, a sleek, panther-like creature leapt toward him, its fangs bared. Instinctively, Joe raised his plasma blade, but the creature twisted midair, avoiding the strike. It landed behind him, its tail lashing. "Keep moving!" Myra's voice urged. Joe didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, weaving between the thick trunks of alien trees. The creature gave chase, its growls growing louder. Spotting a low-hanging branch, Joe grabbed it and swung himself up, narrowly avoiding the predator's snapping jaws. From his perch, he spotted a cluster of glowing blue berries. An idea formed. Reaching for his belt, he pulled out a small grenade-like device Mira had given him earlier. He crushed some of the berries against its casing and dropped it near the creature. The panther sniffed the device cautiously before batting it with its paw. A moment later, the grenade exploded in a flash of light, leaving the predator stunned. Myra's voice cut through the simulation. "Clever. Using the environment to your advantage. But don't get cocky. That was one creature. There'll be dozens in the arena." The jungle dissolved, leaving Joe standing in the sterile training room once more. He grinned, sweat dripping from his forehead. "Guess that's a pass, huh?" Mira approached him, arms crossed. "You're improving, but don't mistake progress for readiness. Thraxian won't play fair." Joe's grin faded. "What do you mean?" Later that evening, Mira sat across from Joe in a dimly lit briefing room. A hologram of Thraxian hovered between them, displaying a recording of his earlier conversations with his aides. "He's rigging the trial," Mira explained. "The creatures in the arena aren't natural. They're engineered, stronger, faster, deadlier than anything you've faced in training. He's betting on you failing spectacularly so he can humiliate humanity." Joe leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "So, not just a trial. It's a setup." "Exactly." Mira leaned forward, her tone serious. "You need to outthink him, not just outfight his creatures. Use every trick you've got." Joe was silent for a moment, then he smirked. "You know, back on the ranch, we had this bull named Diablo. Meanest thing you've ever seen. Used to charge at anything that moved." Mira raised an eyebrow. And we didn't fight him head-on," Joe continued. "We used smarts. Lured him into the pen with bait, shut the gate behind him. Sometimes brute force ain't the answer." Mira allowed herself a small smile. "If you can apply that logic to the arena, we might stand a chance." The next morning, Joe was back in the simulation room, this time facing a gauntlet of increasingly difficult scenarios. Each one tested not only his reflexes but also his ability to think creatively under pressure. By the end of the day, he was exhausted but determined. Mira watched him from the observation deck, her expression unreadable. "You've got potential," she admitted as he walked up to her. "But potential isn't enough. Tomorrow, it's real." Joe nodded, his face serious for once. "I know. And I'll be ready." As they left the room, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything, Joe's unshakable confidence might just be their greatest weapon. Cliffhanger. That evening, in the shadows of the Galactic Council chamber, Thraxian met with a hooded figure. "The modifications are complete," the figure whispered. "The human stands no chance." Thraxian's mandibles twitched in a cruel approximation of a smile. "Perfect. Let humanity learn its place." The arena was a vast, foreboding landscape, a biomechanical construct that shifted and adapted, challenging its occupants at every turn. Jagged cliffs towered over dense alien forests, while rivers of molten liquid snaked through the terrain. Overhead, an artificial sky churned with storm clouds, lightning crackling ominously. Joe Carter stood at the starting gate, his plasma blade strapped to his back and a pulse rifle slung over his shoulder. His cowboy hat was gone, replaced by a sleek, protective helmet Mira had insisted he wear. The hum of the crowd, thousands of alien spectators watching the trial, was muffled by the helmet's audio dampeners, but Joe could still feel their anticipation. From the observation deck high above, Mara Alvarez watched intently, her hands clenched into fists. She had spent every spare moment preparing Joe for this, but she couldn't shake the gnawing fear that it might not be enough. A booming voice echoed through the arena. "The rite of evaluation begins now!" The gate before Joe slid open with a hiss, revealing the alien wilderness beyond. He stepped forward, scanning the terrain with practiced caution. His boots crunched against the gravel, and the faint scent of ozone filled the air. Suddenly, a loud roar shattered the relative silence. From the shadows of the forest emerged the first challenger, a massive, six-legged beast with spiked armor and glowing red eyes. Its claws dug into the ground as it charged toward Joe, its maw opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Joe didn't flinch. He raised his pulse rifle, sighted the creature, and fired. Blue plasma bolts streaked through the air, striking the beast's armored hide. The impacts left scorch marks but didn't slow it down. "Great!" Joe muttered, dodging to the side as the creature lunged. "Looks like we're doing this the hard way." He sprinted toward a cluster of boulders, the beast hot on his heels. Sliding behind cover, he glanced at his surroundings. The arena's designers had added plenty of hazards, but also opportunities. His eyes landed on a vine-covered tree with a thick canopy of glowing purple fruit. "Time to get creative," he muttered. Joe fired a few more shots at the beast, drawing it closer. Then, with a burst of speed, he climbed the tree, his hands gripping the thick vines. The creature snarled below, its claws raking the bark as it tried to follow. Joe reached the canopy and grabbed a handful of the glowing fruit, smashing them against the trunk. A sticky, pungent sap oozed out, coating the area. The creature leapt up, its powerful legs propelling it toward him. But as it landed on the sap-coated trunk, its limbs slipped, sending it crashing back to the ground with a thunderous impact. Joe didn't waste the opportunity. He activated his plasma blade, leapt down, and drove it into the beast's exposed underbelly. The creature let out a final, guttural roar before collapsing. Joe stepped back, breathing hard. "First round's done," he said to himself, wiping sweat from his brow. "What's next?" From the observation deck, Mira exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Good. He's using his head." Thraxian, standing nearby, clicked his mandibles in irritation. "A lucky start. He won't survive the next challenge." The arena shifted, the ground beneath Joe's feet trembling as new obstacles emerged. Massive spires of rock shot up from the ground, creating a maze-like structure. A faint hissing sound echoed through the labyrinth, growing louder with each passing second. Joe pressed his back against one of the spires, listening. The sound was coming from all around him. "Something's stalking me," he muttered. As if on cue, a serpentine creature slithered into view, its iridescent scales reflecting the faint light. Its elongated body moved with unsettling grace, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence. Joe crouched low, gripping his plasma blade. "All right, let's see what you've got." The serpent struck with lightning speed, its fangs aimed at his throat. Joe rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. He swung his blade, but the creature coiled out of reach, its movements too quick to predict. "Fast little sucker," he muttered, his mind racing. As the serpent lunged again, Joe fired his pulse rifle, aiming for the creature's eyes. The shot hit its mark, and the serpent let out a deafening screech, thrashing wildly. Joe seized the opportunity, closing the distance, and driving his blade into its skull. The serpent went limp, its massive body collapsing into a heap. "Two down," Joe said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Meanwhile, in the observation deck, Thraxian's anger was palpable. "How is this human still alive?" Mira smirked. "I told you. Humans are adaptable." Thraxian's mandibles twitched. "He won't survive the final trial." The ground shifted again, this time more violently. Joe stumbled as the maze collapsed, leaving him standing on a narrow platform suspended above a churning sea of molten liquid. Across from him, another platform rose, carrying his final opponent. It was a towering, insected creature, easily 3 times Joe's size. Its exoskeleton glinted like polished steel, and its multiple limbs ended in razor-sharp blades. "Well, ain't you a big fella?" Joe said, gripping his plasma blade tightly. The creature let out a piercing shriek and charged. Joe darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the first swipe. The platform shook with each step the creature took, making it difficult to maintain balance. Joe fired his pulse rifle, but the bolts bounced harmlessly off the creature's armor. He switched tactics, aiming for its legs. The shots hit, slowing the creature slightly, but it wasn't enough. As the insect closed the distance, Joe spotted a cluster of exposed cables on the edge of the platform. He formulated a plan in seconds. "Come on, big guy," he said, backing toward the cables. The creature lunged, and Joe sidestepped at the last moment. The momentum carried the creature into the cables, which sparked violently as they came into contact with its armor. The insect had screeched, its body convulsing as electricity surged through it. Joe didn't wait for it to recover. He activated his plasma blade and plunged it into the creature's exposed underbelly, delivering the killing blow. The insect had collapsed, its massive body falling into the molten sea below. The arena fell silent, the storm clouds above dissipating. The voice of the counselor echoed through the chamber. "The human has completed the rite of evaluation." The crowd erupted into cheers and gasps of disbelief. Joe stood on the platform, breathing hard but victorious. "Well," he said, "guess that's what they call a Texas-sized win." From the observation deck, Mira allowed herself a triumphant smile. Thraxian, meanwhile, stormed out, his defeat absolute. Cliffhanger. As Joe exited the arena, he turned to Mira. "So, what's next?" "I kinda like that." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Don't get too comfortable. If you think Thraxian's done with us, you're wrong." In the shadows, a figure watched them, its eyes glowing ominously.